I've shared this elsewhere, but I had this amazing vision about Joseph Smith and Emma. I saw them on their bed discussing plural marriage. We shouldn't feel like we're being ostracized or we should be ashamed of our doubt. We also shouldn't feel like doubt is empowering, where we're now more enlightened than all these sheep, in the church, following each other blindly. I yelled at the ceiling, basically, hoping that perhaps God was there and he was listening. And God did. He listened and he absorbed my anger. I think he appreciated me being hot versus lukewarm, right? Not being just kind of going along and slowly, going down to hell in my doubt. I think he appreciated my anger more than just not caring or just kind of giving up.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Saints Explained YouTube channel. Today we're here with Leo Winegar, where we're going to be talking about Leo's faith journey as well as his online faith crisis support group that he's created. So welcome to the show, Leo.
Hey, how's it going, Nate? Good to be here.
Yeah, glad you could be here. So, I guess to start out, could you give us a little bit of background about yourself and kind of explain your growing up in the church?
Yeah. So it's kind of a fun challenge to do because I've done it quite a few times on different venues, but because I want to not be totally boring, because people that have watched me talk before try to share something new. But yeah, basically I'm a very standard member of the church growing up in what we'd call Bountiful bubble, where most people at the time when I was there are members of the church, and it's still pretty homogenous area. A lot of members of the church living there in Bountiful. But at the time when I was there, growing up in that area, I couldn't really identify people that were not members, because pretty much everybody was. And I guess there were sometimes members of the or not non-members of the church there, but they were very, very different. So that growing up there is kind of, I was kind of sheltered and didn't really have a chance to have my faith really challenged as a youth. And my skeptical brain was really the only challenge that I had. So I had some critical thoughts before I went to serve a mission. By the time I left on my mission, I had questioned whether or not Joseph Smith could write the Book of Mormon, and had a really profound spiritual experience with the book. And it helped me to give me kind of the energy to get out there on the mission and be able to proclaim the gospel as I believed it to be true. And so that, it was all pretty normal upbringing. Like I said, we had family evenings. I did my home teaching with my dad, and then on my own. And then, after I had my mission, I came home and had a bit of a letdown, probably pretty normal for a lot of former missionary, return missionaries, is, seeing all the wealth and where we lived there in Bountiful compared to the place I'd just been. It really impacted me. I kind of, was critical for a time against, the very rich members of the church around me, and even my own family was kind of troubled by that. And then a big part of my story is really going to BYU. I had some amazing classes there, amazing professors, and Steve Harper is really one of my greatest heroes. That he's the one that actually helped me to recover from my faith crisis. He had a really good lesson. I had DNC with him at BYU, and he gave a really good lesson about consecration. And so I learned from that those series of lessons on consecration, that it's still in effect. That people live a lot of consecration today in the church, and maybe not the exact way that they did, like in the United Order in the early days of the church, but that I was able to judge less a lot of the good members of the church in, like, Bountiful, for example, that were very wealthy, where they would use their time and talents and their resources to build up the kingdom. And they were not being selfish. They were actually just being blessed financially, because their hearts were set on building up the kingdom. And so that really helped me. And everything was really good. I mean, I had normal challenges like anybody, trying to know where to go for work and who to marry and all those things. But I was actually married for about 5 years before my wife and I, Whitney is her name. Whitney, and I had our first child, and that's about a little more than 12 years ago now. That we had this baby. Our oldest, his name is Jackson, and about that time is when I started doing some critical research, really deep diving into some of the critiques of against the church, and so that's kind of where my next phase of my journey goes. But I'll pause.
Yeah. So, my next question was, so what sparked your faith journey?
It was plural marriage primarily.
Uh,
I had some other things that I'd been questioning, like evolution, and there was some just kind of some open questions that I didn't really know how to answer, but nothing really challenged my faith like plural marriage did. And so I I really was troubled by it. I mean, I knew kind of at a cursory level that Joseph Smith practiced plural marriage, but I didn't really understand to what extent, until I it was I've said this elsewhere, but I watched this video that really shocked me. I was a video of a bunch of Protestant Christians, about evangelical Christians at the man type pageant, and a lot of women had come dressed up in old pioneer dresses and had name tags on, and they said like my name is this, on their name tag, and that I'm the first or second wife of Joseph Smith, and there's like 30 something women standing there in a row, and they started telling their story, reenacting as if they were these women. And it was a very impactful video for me because I hadn't really ever thought about, that these were actual women that were impacted by plural marriage. And so, listening to some of these women talk about it, of course, in a very negative light, they were very critical, they were spinning the historical truth as negatively as they could, to try to shock people and convert people away from the church. But it really shocked me. It was an incredible shock to my spiritual system, and I started to question whether or not everything that I had been taught growing up was actually true. I began to see Joseph in a different light, and it just really troubled me. And so that was a beginning of a long journey of research and just struggling with church history, because until that point I thought church history was very boring. It was very, oh, it's just something that you do with genealogy, and it's just, why would you ever study some old, and a lot of the church history books, to be honest, until we got the narrative version, that more like story filled version of saints that we have today, it's more of a narrative retelling of church history. That just the facts, the dates, and this so and so said this. Those long histories are just kind of hard to get into, and I kind of just saw it as a one big boring lump you know, of useless knowledge. And then, but as soon as it became salacious and like, wow, my curiosity was piqued, and I started researching, because it was just like, I had no idea that this actually happened this way. My faith had really not been challenged until that point.
okay. And then, were there any resources that you had at the time, or was that before like Brian Hale's work and all that stuff had came
Yeah,
out?
yeah. And I sent an email to Steve Harper, because I really didn't know any good resources other than like Fawn Brody's "No Man Knows My History" and like a couple other critical books that I'd heard about. Mostly my research is just done online, just watching videos, reading articles from critical sources, because the correlated material that we didn't have the gospel topics essays at the time. Those hadn't come out yet,
Right.
and so to find the details on Joseph's plural marriages was just going to critical sources on the internet. So yeah, that's really where I went for my information, and I really didn't have anybody to talk to. I thought about talking to my local leaders, and I did try actually. My bishop, I knew he didn't really know much about church history, just kind of being around him and talking to him about other things. I knew that he wasn't really a historian, wasn't interested in that. He was a very simple faith kind of guy. And so I didn't feel like I needed to go to him for questions because I figured he would just, wouldn't be able to answer them. So the only person I knew I could go to potentially would be my stake president. And so I scheduled a time to go in and visit with him there in Provo when I was living there. And it was really a letdown, to be honest. It was really hard because he basically just said he believed, he bore his testimony, said, I know Joseph is a true prophet. He kind of shared an anecdote as to why he thought he was such a good man. And I'd shared a little bit about my concerns, and he really didn't, say, hey, I've studied that. And I can see where you're coming from. It was just, hey, he's like, get on with the program, Leo. And it was more of like a pat on the bum, get out the door and go back to work, go build Zion, and just let go of those doubts. And that was not effective for me. And a lot of, I think, church leaders have since repented from those kind of interactions. There's been a lot of movement inside the church to not just dismiss, these doubts that people are bringing to them. There's been great talks by Elder Ballard, was one, to like the CES. He said that all of the instructors should know the new church history information like the back of their hand, the gospel topics essays. They should be very well versed in these issues and be able to not dismiss doubt, difficult questions, but to engage and so institutes have improved, seminaries have improved, and we're a lot better placed now. But at the time, when I went to my stake president, hoping that he'd studied some of these issues, that was really all I had as far as a resource. So,
Right. And I'm glad the church has improved a lot on that.
mhm,
Because I've always felt like when people have struggles with church history problems require church history solutions. And
mhm,
I don't think anybody's really ever been helped by someone just kind of saying they believe and just kind of brushing aside the issues. But
mhm, mhm.
um, what pulled you out of your faith crisis?
So it was a combination of things. The beginning of it was that revelation I received an answer to, not to my own prayers. But I kind of stopped praying by that point. I was really in a funk and didn't really know what to do, and I had this bolt of lightning revelation that came to me when I was in Provo, still there, living there with my wife and our newborn baby. I had this like out of the blue thought. It just said contact Stephen Harper, like a voice that spoke to me audibly, and I think pierced my heart as well. But it was the spirit, and the spirit said, contact Stephen Harper. And I thought, wow, I think maybe that's maybe where I could go for some help here. And so I emailed him, and I kind of outlined my main concerns with Joseph Smith's plural marriage, what I'd researched, and asked him if he could confirm, the information. Is this really true? And what do you do with this? Like, how do you handle plural marriage? And I found out that Steve, not in that correspondence, but later on, he's shared this with me. But he himself had struggled with plural marriage. It was not a very easy topic for him to digest and to deal with. And I think for most people that study it, it's not a hey, that's no big deal kind of thing. I think most people have to sit with it and really have to wrestle with that. And so his immediate response to me in that email back was loving, was kind, was open. He wasn't trying to hide anything, but he did challenge me. He said, I would challenge you, Leo, to not let go of the things that you knew, that you know, like the things, these spiritual experiences that you've had. Don't let go of those. And he also said to begin to assume the worst about Joseph Smith, to maybe hold off from assuming the worst, and to re-examine my new critical assumptions that I was making, and perhaps try again and try to assume maybe more of a neutral about Joseph instead of so critically of him. And that just really like just blew my mind open, because until that point I was like critical. Like, how could I was felt deceived. I felt like bamboozled. I felt swindled by the church. I thought the church had been hiding this information from me. And in some regards, I think the church hasn't been as forthcoming historically on these issues, and for different reasons. And I'm not going to judge like past leaders for doing that, for the faithful narratives, only telling the faithful side of stories. But I know that their intentions were good, but in the case of many people, that those intentions, righteous or right or not, they've really let it set us up for failure in a lot of us that have struggled with historical issues, because it does feel like that that our church leaders were quote unquote hiding the truth. And so I just had to be more charitable towards past and present leaders, and be willing to accept the fact that I'm not perfect. And as I was humbled by his challenge to re-examine my assumptions, I began to pray more sincerely and more humbly, but with more like honest anger. I was angry still at some of the thoughts and feelings I was having about Joseph Smith and other early church leaders and some of the things that they did. And I expressed my anger to God. One of the things I've talked about in other places is one of the first real prayers I had after I'd sent that email to Steve Harper was I was alone in my house, and I kneeled down and said, God, like up at the sky, like I looked up in the ceiling. I wasn't bowing my head. I looked up in defiance and I said, God, if you're there, if you really are there, I need you to. You must. I gave him an ultimatum. I said, you must answer these questions that I have. You have to do it, because I'm hitting rock bottom. I can't handle this. I need information. I need answers to my questions. And so when I did that, I yelled at the ceiling, basically, hoping that perhaps God was there and he was listening. And God did. He listened and he absorbed my anger. I think he appreciated me being hot versus lukewarm, right? Not being just kind of going along and slowly, going down to hell in my doubt. I think he appreciated my anger more than just not caring or just kind of giving up. And he absorbed my anger and my frustration, and he returned with great love. He returned it with answers, and I started receiving amazing revelation. Like out of the blue, I would be cooking something or talking to somebody or just sitting quietly, and I would just have these bolts of lightning, like answers, like amazing revelation that would come to me, and sometimes visions as well. Like I've shared this elsewhere, but I had this amazing vision about Joseph Smith and Emma. I saw them on their bed discussing plural marriage, and it was like, yeah, they talked about this, and they don't. Joseph never wrote down in his journal, or Emma didn't say, she actually denied that he practiced, but they never wrote down like, hey, we on the such and such night we sat at length and discussed this commandment from the Lord that Joseph received, and I expressed how I felt. Emma saying I expressed that I was frustrated by it and struggled with it, and Joseph, said he struggled with it initially, and that he's found some peace. And this is, they never talk about that, their private conversations, because that was their private, marriage. And I didn't see much other than just a short vision of them sitting there talking, but it was enough to know that they discussed this, they wrestled with it together. It was an act of love between the two of them, trying to figure out how to handle this commandment. And it wasn't like I don't think Joseph was out gallivanting around out of lust. I think he received the commandment. He really struggled with it, and then he found ways to become more at peace with it. And he was trying to help Emma also to reach a state of peace with it. I think that they wanted to keep the commandments of God, that they've been given. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think I've heard you talk in other places about how um, part of this experience has helped you realize that we all kind of have a limited amount of light, and we can only see so far out in front of us,
Mhm.
and we all see through a glass darkly. And so I don't think it's fair to be too judgmental of people when we're all trying to do the best we can, you know?
Right. hmm That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have to be, uh, we have to extend charity uh, towards everybody because we're all fallen. We all struggle. And, even the prophets of old, we have to be charitable towards them. We're very charitable towards like, some of the ancient prophets, and then the Old Testament, especially, some of the weird things that they did. It's easy for us to say, oh, that's just a different time and place. So they did some weird things, you know. Is it Elisha with the bears sending them to maul those children? Those not
Oh,
children, but
yeah.
like
Yeah.
the youth and stuff. Like there's some really strange behavior, and for because it's so long ago, we're like, oh, that's just they were sort of prophets, and they were given more permission to do these things, and I just think like, well, they're also just like us, like they're in their time and place. That was maybe a mistake. Maybe that was a recorded mistake. I mean, like Jonah is a great example of a serious mistake he made, but he was still considered a prophet. And so, yeah, I think that we can be more charitable towards them, past and present. And it's difficult for us to be able to say today, because we're taught strongly to sustain, right? We think the sustain word means agree with. It's just something that's kind of baked into that. And we've started to counter that narrative, to say you don't have to agree with a leader to sustain them, which is really helpful verbiage because of thought. Because, when you have President Nelson getting a shot, and having a picture of him getting his COVID shot, you can say, I don't agree with that. And I personally, I think it was a good thing for him to do, to be a community servant, helping in the broader community, to be a good faith actor, to help to reduce the damage of COVID. So, I'm not a political person, but I think that President Nelson, that, is a wise doctor, surgeon, medically trained, probably had some good, reasons to do that. But some people may say, no, that's a serious mistake. He really went down a wrong road there by encouraging people to get the COVID shot. And there's, members of the church, I think, I understand. I've heard stories and of people that have told me, yeah, that so and so my ward has left the church because of the COVID shot.
Man.
So it's, people struggle on the right and on the left politically with the church. If their political ideology doesn't align with the church and what it's professing, then that sometimes becomes their mother religion, and the church becomes the child religion, and that's also a danger. I think political ideology can become a stumbling block for people, and so yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So, switching gears, what made you decide to start a faith crisis support community online?
Well, it's yeah. So it was fun to start. It was actually initially called Uplift Study Group, and it was just a local group in like Dallas. I had a friend of mine in my ward, and we thought it'd be cool to just meet together locally and study interesting topics related to the gospel, and help each other with church history, other things that we could do to help each other. And then one day I felt inspired and directed to just go onto Facebook. And Facebook's probably outdated now. I don't think people use it very much, but at the time people were still pretty active on Facebook. And so I was directed by the Spirit to create a group. And I followed the inspiration and created a group called Uplift Study Group on Facebook. And we were doing that for about a year. I invited a bunch of people to it. We had this Facebook group where you could go in and ask questions, not anonymously. On Facebook, you have to actually have your profile picture and your name. But yeah, so we were able to let people to come in and be able to ask questions and receive help from each other on difficult questions related to the church. And so, yeah, we did a lot of good. We had some conferences, and I've been involved kind of on the side a little bit since then. There's other people that are running the group now, but And there's not a ton of growth there. It's not, we've never received any kind of donations or, a drive to become the top community for faithful questioning people. So, but it's still been a wonderful place. It was good for me for a long time. I used it for my own benefit to ask, questions that I was still struggling with as I was trying to recover from my down period in my life. So, yeah.
Right. That's cool. How many years have you done the support group for?
It was founded in 2017. So we're, I guess, almost 10 years in. Is that right? Yeah. A couple more years and we'll be 10 years. Um, so yeah, it's if you look for it on Facebook, it's called Uplift Community of Faith. We changed the name to Uplift Community of Faith. And so yeah, so we're I think like 4,000 members in the group. And it's not super active anymore, to be honest. We probably get like one or two questions a day, maybe, and you know, or just commentary, people sharing articles and things. And so there's other bigger groups now, like Faith Matters. They have a big conference, and there's other groups like I think Jacob Hansen. He's kind of a big guy now. We actually Jacob and I have quite a history, but Jacob's got, I think, Thoughtful Faith is a group. He has a community that people can go and ask questions, and
Yeah.
so there's other resources now. But at the time when we founded in 2017, there wasn't a lot out there like communities, online communities for faithful people. Um, so it's been good.
So I guess the next thing I wanted to ask you is what kind of resources are out there for people who are struggling with their faith and who want to do a deeper dive into church history or theology or any of those kinds of things?
So it depends on the type of information that you do well with. So books are a great resource for a lot of people, and there's a lot of books that are out there on faith crisis in general, how to minister to people in faith crisis, church history books. The Saints volumes are really good. So reading information is wonderful. For me, I like to watch a lot of videos. I like to watch debates, and so especially theists versus atheists. I think those
Yeah.
debates are always very fascinating, and try to see how people handle information differently and the different arguments. And so that for me was really helpful. I just looked for all the debates I could find. There weren't a lot of debates, LDS versus non-LDS debates online that I could find at the time as I was. But there's quite a bit more now. Jacob Hansen. I've mentioned him a couple of times, but Jacob Hansen has some good things out there that he's been doing more active on YouTube. And um, I think just going back to DNC 88, the verse about learning from the best books, right? Together with someone who's doubting. If you have someone that's doubting in your life or you're doubting, find someone who believes. And I think that learning together, hand in hand, walking together by learning together is a very helpful thing. So yeah, it's all about learning and learning in a way that feels authentic to you and genuine. And I think if you do that, and as long as you're being prayerful at the same time, people that just want to learn, it's all a cerebral exercise. They're not actually involving God in the process. That's where a lot of people, I think, they stop praying, or they pray like, it's kind of like testing God to see if he'll work with them.
Right.
Looking for a sign only, and they're not really sincere and really trying to involve God, or they give up. Sometimes they'll just say God's, likely not there, so I'm not. I might pray a couple times, or they might pray, but their heart's not really in it. And I don't want to judge. I think there are people that probably do really want answers, and they do pray sincerely for a long time, and they don't receive answers, confirmatory answers to stay in the church to help resolve their doubts. And so I can't dismiss their experience. There's people that go through that and they don't ever get, answers to help them to stay in the church. Some people actually report receiving answers to leave the church. And so I'm not going to say that their experience is invalid or they're being duped by Satan. I'm not sure. I think that God can guide people in a lot of mysterious ways. And so I'm not an advocate for people to leave the church, but I have seen some people that leave the church because of certain reasons, and they actually do find God in other ways, in beautiful ways. And so I think this is a long process for many people. It shouldn't be just, expected to be like, a couple months and they're back. So, yeah.
Right. So, what kinds of things are kind of the pillars of your testimony? Like, what kinds of things give you belief, I guess?
Uh, well, it's the Hafin's model, the three stages of simplicity, complexity, and simplicity beyond complexity. Once again, returning to a simple faith. So the simple things in my faith now are probably the sacrament, probably number one. Just being there, being able to, with little kids, tiny kids, it's hard, and that's part of my past 10 years is having little kids, but my kids are a little older now, so I'm actually able to sit there and to reflect on the Savior's life and his sacrifice, and so making that a meaningful part of my week has had a profound impact on me. I love the sacrament. I love being able to sit there and think about his body and his blood on the cross, in Gethsemane, and the sacrifice for me to draw me toward him. That's probably my top pillar of my testimony, the sacrament. I do work in the temple. I've mentioned this elsewhere, but I'm actually a church employee now, and I'm not going to say where I am tonight, if you can probably guess, but I'm out in the lobby of the temple, so it's probably okay for me to be out here talking. But
Yeah. Do you
the temple,
do? Oh,
yeah,
sorry. Do you
the
do
temple,
any ordinance work at all in the temple or anything? Or
yeah, no, I do. But my job in the temple is I'm actually a security supervisor here.
that's cool.
So yeah.
So, what advice would you give someone who is starting to question or is doubting their faith? Like, where did they go? I guess.
Um, the biggest thing for me, for I think the advice I would give to somebody is to not go it alone, like I did. Um, it's a really hard thing for somebody, and I think Satan wants us to be ashamed and to feel shame for our doubt. There's a stigma, I think, historically in the church that you can, if you're a serious doubter, you don't believe anymore. You can be declined callings. You can be, you can lose your family. There's cases where people, a spouse that's very believing will say, well, if you don't believe anymore, we're gonna have to get a divorce. And so today, though, in today's church, I think we're a lot more open minded. People are more willing to write it out with somebody they love, and so we should feel more confident that we can actually share our experience with our loved ones and not to be so ashamed. It's almost like doubt is like a sin for some of us. We feel like, oh, I'm sinning because I'm doubting, but
Right.
we shouldn't feel that way. We should feel, that we're wounded. We need help to be able to recover from doubt. And there is a narrative out there in the critical communities that the doubt is an empowering way to lose the bands of this blindness. You have your eyes be open to the truth about Mormonism, and there's this idea that if you doubt, you're being liberated, from the closed mindedness of this cult, the quote unquote cult, right? And so we shouldn't feel like either we shouldn't feel like we're being ostracized or we should be ashamed of our doubt, but we also shouldn't feel like doubt is empowering, where we're now more enlightened than all these sheep, in the church, following each other blindly and being brainwashed. That there's these two extremes, and so I think we need balance. I think we need to say, well, I shouldn't sit in my place of doubt forever. I shouldn't embrace it. I should try to overcome it and challenge it, but I also shouldn't, do the other extreme, where I'm ashamed of it. So it's a balance. Seek answers, but do it with a loved one. Find someone who is understanding. If it's not a bishop, if it's not a stake president, if it's a past professor like I did, or if it's a spouse, someone you think that would be willing to get into the trenches with you, that has the time and enough energy and the ability, the capacity to do it. There's some people probably that wouldn't be able to get down in the trenches and actually study with you and help you to get out of it. There's people that just can't do that, and I won't say names in my own life necessarily who would be who probably wouldn't be able to do that. I'm not going to name names of people that probably I don't think could do that, but I'm just saying as an example in your own life, think about people that maybe would be able to withstand some difficult questions or that have gone through that.
Right.
So
Yeah. That was all the questions I had. Are there any final thoughts that you would like to leave everybody with?
uh, well, I'm happy to be there if anybody would like to talk and discuss questions that they have. I'm happy to always do that and to be a resource. If someone wants to reach out to me, they can.
Yeah, and then
So
if
yeah.
someone wants to reach out to you, where can they reach you?
Just by email. My email address is leowinegar@gmail.com.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah, you can
All
reach out.
righty. All right, well, thank you for joining me for today's episode of the Saints Explained podcast. I truly appreciate it. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this episode of Saints Explained. We hope that you liked this video, and make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you can be notified every time we post.